With the exception of perhaps Caleb Williams at USC, and I say perhaps, Michael Penix is the most accurate quarterback from the pocket in this draft class.
Welcome into the NFL on Fox podcast. I am Dave Helman, and I am buzzing with excitement about this week. We have got a loaded week for y'all. So much content, so many good interviews, so many good segments, just so much quality NFL content. It's almost like draft season is heating up. We're reaching the apex of the offseason. The schedule's going to be out soon. We're finally going to know where all these players are going. It's just a fun time of year. We have the content that reflects it. You know the drill. If you don't already, make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you prefer to listen to your podcasts. If that's Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you can leave me a 5-star review if you really want to. Mom and dad, if you're listening, if you still listen to these, maybe go leave a review. Do it under a pseudonym, though, so nobody knows, nobody sees the name. That would be great. Yeah, really fun week for y'all. People say mock draft Monday. See if you follow me here. What about a thought exercise Tuesday? I can't tell you how much I hate myself for even trying that. It's bad. It's not as catchy, but it is Tuesday. And we are going to talk mock draft. We've got the great Rob Rang, our guy from foxsports.com. He has got a new mock draft, and that's what they are. So even, I mean, the joke sucked. I get it. But a mock draft is a thought exercise. Go down the list and say, I never thought about that. Oh, I guess they could do that. So that's what we're going to do. Rob Rang joins us now to talk about his latest mock and all the latest that he's hearing about who might go where in this 2024 NFL draft that I promise is approaching. We're going to get there together. We're going to do it with Rob Rang's help. All right, Rob Rang, draft expert, guru. I think the last time we had you on was around the Senior Bowl. So I'm always curious just from, and I know, you know, for those of y'all that really live the draft, this is a year-round thing, but from January until now, how has your appreciation or your overview of this draft class changed here as we've really cranked it up?
Well, I think the biggest thing, David, is just maybe the rise in draft stock for, say, a Michael Penix Jr. He was a player that, of course, was the Heisman Trophy finalist this past season, was critical to the Huskies' run to the national championship game. Everybody saw that, but one of the concerns that I had about him was just the medical grade. And so to see him be just as successful with the Senior Bowl and with a different play caller, of course, and then go to the combine, participate there and do very well, go to the pro day, participate and do very well there also. I think that just kind of solidifies his draft stock. I think that he is one of the fastest rising names in this entire process. And there's a number of other players that are reportedly receiving positive medical feedback. Leatu Latu, the edge rusher from UCLA, being another one. And so to me, that's really where this process gets a little bit interesting because, as you said, I mean, once the season ends in December and January, and then you have all the all-star games, you really get that apples to apples kind of a comparison. Then really the hay is in the barn from an evaluating standpoint. Now it's all about medical grades.
Which I think that it's a very good point, and it's something I don't know that we do a good enough job of pointing out is even those of us in the media that are super plugged in, it's not quite the same thing as doing the medical evaluations yourself. Each team is going to have different thoughts about stuff like that. And I do think that lends itself to some unpredictability where there's 32 different opinions about every guy obviously from a playing perspective, but also from a medical perspective. And I do think people lose sight sometimes of like, hey, we have a good picture, but a lot of times we do not have the complete picture that these NFL teams have on these guys.
Oh, no question about it. That's what makes the combine so fascinating. Again, it's all about the medical evaluations and it's about the interview process. I mean, these are young men who, of course, are very physically gifted. That's why they were among 330 players invited to Indianapolis in the first place. But NFL teams take that interview process incredibly seriously. They want to see who really has the heart of a champion, and who really is going to take this process very, very seriously, as they should. So again, to me, that is one of the things that anybody with watches on YouTube or whatever the case might be can see who are some of the better players, more gifted players, but that doesn't necessarily who is going to be the best NFL players when it's all said and done. And so that's the thing. What makes this process so fascinating is again, it's not all about who has physical talent. It's who has the heart to be one of those very rare people who is going to work harder after receiving $1 million contract than they did beforehand.
Okay, so Rob is here, as I said at the top. We're gonna go through his latest mock draft for Fox Sports. It dropped Monday. It's on the website, foxsports.com. It's on the app. If you're an app person, Fox Sports app, you can go take a look at it. We're not gonna do every single pick here. You can go read the story. Make sure Rob gets a click. It's a click industry, okay? So go give Rob a click. But what I do want to do is go through your mock, Rob, and hit I guess we'll call them inflection points, the parts where this draft could really change, maybe some of the more interesting decisions, and just kind of get the rationale. Like I said at the top of the show, it's a thought exercise. So let's start here. Again, I think we said this a couple weeks ago. I'm going to leave Caleb Williams right where he is as the number 1 overall pick. I don't think we need to talk a whole lot about it. At number 2, though, Rob, I do appreciate you having Drake Maye going to the Washington Commanders, which I don't know if you saw Brian Kelly's Freudian slip that Jayden Daniels was going to do everything he could for Washington. But you're like me. You're not buying it. You still think Drake Maye is QB2 in this draft.
I do. I think this is my own personal evaluation. I think that Drake May is the number 2 quarterback in this draft class, but also because look, with all due respect to the LSU head coach Brian Kelly, he's not making the decisions for the Washington Commanders, and so I think that it's understandable why Brian Kelly would love to see his quarterback Jayden Daniels be the number 2 overall selection, back-to-back Heisman Trophy winners, and all of that. But again, I just look at the Washington Commanders as really a fascinating team. You just had an inflection point. I think that this is going to be a fascinating point here, just because Washington, of course, is making that transition from Sam Howell, former North Carolina quarterback, and you take Drake May, another former North Carolina quarterback, actually the heir apparent to Sam Howell there. I think that is an interesting dynamic. I just look at the long term upside that Drake May possesses. Look, Jayden Daniels is an incredibly talented quarterback. He is arguably the best dual threat quarterback in this draft. I mean, just what a slithery, smooth scrambler, and it also shows a great deal of accuracy on the deep ball. Made huge strides this past season in that regard for LSU. Drake May, over the last couple of years, however, has been a more accurate, more consistent passer. And so, again, I just view Washington as a team that is very much in the rebuilding process. I think that Dan Quinn is going to be going for the kind of the prototypical build of a Drake May, the prototypical mindset of a Drake May over Jayden Daniels, who is a talented player, but I also think that he was helped by the wide receiver talent that he had at LSU, whereas Drake May didn't get that advantage.
I mean, we did this last week, and I'll stand by it. Even as an LSU grad, the ceiling of Drake Maye is far, far too appealing for me to ignore. So I hear you on that. And then you don't have Jayden Daniels slipping far at all. You've got him going to the very next pick with the New England Patriots. I'm curious. This really, and I guess Washington has first pick of the best of the rest, but New England is particularly interesting just because, again, going back to, we just don't know, where does New England think it is as a franchise? Because I sit here, like, me, if I'm making the decision, I'm like, man, it makes a lot of sense for New England to try to get the hell out of there and get a haul of picks. But at the same time, Robert Kraft might be tired of not having an all-star quarterback. He got used to a certain level of play there for 20 years. So this does feel like a situation where beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and only the Patriots really feel good about what they're going to do here.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I think that New England, it's going to be interesting because obviously you are not only moving on from Tom Brady, you're moving on from Bill Belichick, of course. And so I almost think that New England is going to want to do something completely different than what they have done in the past. And of course, you can't get much different than a Tom Brady or a Mac Jones, for that matter, as a kind of a traditional pocket passer than a guy again with Jayden Daniels' elusiveness. So to me, that would make an awful lot of sense. I think that a defensive-minded head coach, former linebacker Gerard Mayo, is going to have a greater appreciation for just how difficult it is to try and contain a dual threat passer like a Jayden Daniels. And unlike Washington, which I feel like is again in the midst of a huge rebuild and going up against an awful lot of teams in the NFC East that I think believe themselves to be Super Bowl contenders. I don't know that that necessarily is quite the case in the AFC East. Maybe it is if the Jets get Aaron Rodgers to remain healthy and Buffalo and Miami are able to take that next step. But I really think that New England is a team that is looking for a rookie quarterback to be able to come in and kind of take control immediately and be the kind of the face of the franchise. And so that's why I do believe that Washington at 2, New England at 3 is where you're going to see the next two quarterbacks come off the board. Again, with Caleb Williams, of course, going to Chicago number 1 overall.
One last big thing in the top 10, because I want to make sure we hit as much of the first round as possible. But then if the Patriots are a big candidate to trade, I think another one you have to consider is obviously the LA Chargers with just a lot of work to do. It makes sense if they want to trade out of that pick. But at the same time, we're having if we can take it back to the Cincinnati Bengals from a couple years ago, we're having the Jamar Chase versus Penei Sewell debate all over again with the LA Chargers in terms of receiver or tackle. And here you've got them breaking the Tennessee Titans' hearts and taking Joe Alt off the board. Is that, I mean, clearly you think that's a realistic possibility that we see the first offensive tackle gone in the top 5?
Well, it's just the Jim Harbaugh factor, in my opinion. It's kind of like we talked about before with Brian Kelly and anticipating where that his quarterback Jayden Daniels might go. Of course, Jim Harbaugh just won the national championship with the Michigan Wolverines based on an absolutely dominant defense, stellar running game, quality play at the quarterback and receiver position to be sure, but still, it's the same exact recipe that he used to take the San Francisco 49ers to the Super Bowl all those years ago. Again, a dynamic defense and a stellar running game as well. Now you look at the Los Angeles Chargers, and obviously they have concerns at the wide receiver position, losing or trading away Keenan Allen, Mike Williams as well. And then you want to protect Justin Herbert, clearly. But at the same time, I think that is exactly what the Chargers are looking to do is to protect Justin Herbert literally. And Joe Alt, in my opinion, is the safest of this year's offensive tackle class. That said, I do think one of the reasons why Jim Harbaugh has been, basically just bandying about his former quarterback, JJ McCarthy's name is to try and drum up some interest in that number 5 overall selection. In my opinion, David, the Los Angeles Chargers at number 5, Tennessee Titans at number 7 are the two teams inside that top 10, along with New England Patriots at 3, that I think are the where you should be looking if you are a club looking to trade up to get one of these quarterbacks.
One last thing on Alt in particular, and I obviously the offensive tackle class is fascinating because it's good. It's also very versatile. Like there's a lot of guys here that can play all over the place. I'm curious with Rashawn Slater already being in Los Angeles, do you think Joe Alt would play right tackle in this scenario, or how would you handle that?
I do think that he could play. I think that you have two players there in Slater and Alt that can basically be interchangeable, play either side. A lot of people view Slater as a guard initially when he came into the NFL, and of course, Jim Harbaugh is going to know Rashawn Slater from his days at Northwestern very, very well. I just think that this. It's going to be interesting to see what the Chargers actually do. I see Alt as a guy that may follow exactly what his father did at Kansas City when he was a multiple Pro Bowler and being able to play multiple different positions along the offensive line. And again, it's more about just solidifying the Chargers offensive line as a whole rather than just saying this is our left tackle, that's our right tackle. I think it's more about making sure that you have Justin Herbert protected as best as possible.
I know exactly how good Jamar Chase has been for the Bengals, but I still think this is the philosophy that makes sense. Like, give me the protection for my quarterback, and I'll worry about who he's throwing to after that. All right. Moving outside the top 10, and you mentioned at the top that you are impressed with how Michael Penix Jr. is rising up the draft board. Not only do you have him going 11th overall to the Minnesota Vikings, you do have him going in front of JJ McCarthy, who has kind of been the wild card name among quarterbacks. So if the medicals are coming back clearly, and that is such an issue for Penix with his college injury history, if the medicals are coming back clear, you feel that good about Penix that he could go 11th overall and in front of JJ McCarthy?
I do. David, with the exception of perhaps Caleb Williams at USC, and I say perhaps, Michael Penix is the most accurate quarterback from the pocket in this draft class. And to me, that is really still where the game is played at the quarterback position. And I just love the fit with Kevin O'Connell and the Minnesota Vikings in particular. I think that the Vikings may fall so in love with Michael Penix Jr., they may wind up trading both of their first round selections to make sure that they can get Penix. Look, I'm a JJ McCarthy fan as well. I really think that the statistics that he had at Michigan, you can throw out the window because, again, the Wolverines were just so loaded on defense and that running game. But I really believe that McCarthy is absolutely worthy of a top 20 selection. But I believe that Penix is as well. I personally think that Penix's fit in Minnesota's offense is that much better than JJ McCarthy's. So, yes, I do believe that you are going to see Michael Penix come off the board in the top 11 or 12 selections. Denver Broncos, number 12 overall, would make a lot of sense in Sean Payton's offense as well. So again, I feel very confident that Michael Penix is going to wind up being drafted earlier than a lot of other my fellow draft prognosticators out there are anticipating.
It's fun. I think Penix to me it's like the biggest variation because really, and it's a shame because if you told me Michael Penix Jr. was guaranteed a clean bill of health, I absolutely have no problem with drafting him that high. But because of that, I'm not going to be surprised if he's still hanging out on Friday night waiting to hear his name called on day 2 of the draft. And that's the shame of it is, what does the medical situation look like? How comfortable are all these teams with that situation? But I'm with you, man. If you promise me he's healthy, I have no problem with this. I think people are, you get lost a little bit in the medicals and the age factor. You turn on the guy's tape, it's very, very fun and very, very impressive. So I hear you.
Well, and I appreciate that. I mean, again, I have a little bit of an advantage, and I'm not a University of Washington graduate myself, but I do live in the greater Seattle area and was able to attend the University of Washington Pro Day, where a couple of managers that I have learned to trust, and apparently they've learned to trust me over the 25 years that I've been doing this. That was the big question that I was asking them and scouts and the University of Washington's trainers is, look, how clean is Michael Penix's medical evaluation from the combine? And I got rave reviews from everybody as far as Penix's medical grade, as far as his leadership, his intelligence. I saw with my own eyes what a leader that he was, even during bench press drills and things like that, where it was his teammates who were competing. To see Michael Penix be right there, screaming in their ears, helping his teammates kind of, get over the hump, so to speak, to just put out their best performance. That to me is the leadership traits that, frankly, some of the other quarterbacks in this draft class are a little bit lacking in.
I'm getting on board with this as we're talking about it. It's not a hard sell. Like I said, really, it's just the medicals. If everything is in order there, I'm on board with it. So I'm excited to see what happens there. Here's one. I love this, Rob, and let's have a laugh at how ridiculous this whole thing is when you're trying to project this, because you start doing mock drafts before the season's even over. And if you cover the draft, you do about 24 of these things, maybe more, depending on who you work for. And it starts to get boring. You see the same names in the same places, and you're like, oh my God, can we mix it up? Can we do it? Can we do something different? And then as soon as somebody does, everybody says, "What the hell's wrong with you? Why is this guy? Why did he fall? Why isn't he going where he's supposed to?" The groupthink is hysterical, and that's where I'm going with your number 14 pick to the New Orleans Saints, because I see Washington receiver Rome Odunze all the way down there at 14, and I'm like, what the hell is Rob thinking? This guy is clearly a top 10 pick. But I've also been doing this long enough to know it never completely follows the script we expect it to.
It does not, and that's the reason why I had Mickey Loomis, the longtime general manager of the New Orleans Saints, basically just throwing his hands up in the air and saying, "Look, I acknowledge the medical concerns that we have with our left tackle Ryan Ramczyk, but this is just too darn good of a football player, landing in our lap at this point." And the Saints, of course, have some concerns at the wide receiver position as well. I mean, Chris Olave is a star, but he also is a little bit injury prone and doesn't play with the physicality that a 6'3", 215-pounder like Rome Odunze possesses. So again, I am 100% in lockstep with you, Dave. I think the Rome Odunze should be a top 10 selection. That said, the wide receiver depth is so good that I could see a number of NFL clubs out there basically saying, look, why would we invest a top 10 selection in wide receiver when we can get a pretty darn good football player in the second or third rounds? I do think that you are going to see four receivers come off the board in the first 15, 16 selections. Of course, Marvin Harrison Jr., Rome Odunze, as we just talked about, going number 14 overall in my mock draft. And then the two LSU players, Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU, is a player that I think a lot of people are sleeping on as well. But again, I think that you might see those players all slide a little bit lower down the board. I have Harrison going fourth overall, the Arizona Cardinals, like a lot of people do. But I do think that you might see those four receivers go, and then there'd be a little bit of a gap before number 5 comes off the board.
Who would you get? I'm putting you on the spot a little bit. I'm sorry, but who would you guess would be the next receiver taken?
Keon Coleman from Florida State, at
Mm.
least in my opinion, it's no question about it. And look, I like Loud McConkey from Georgia, Troy Franklin from Oregon, Roman Wilson from Michigan have the straight line speed that you're looking for. Roman Wilson has better hands than Troy Franklin does, and has kind of consistently moved up throughout this entire process. His performance at the Senior Bowl as well as at the Combine, whereas Troy Franklin has been a little bit shakier, but at the same time, their straight line speed again, with McConkey at Georgia as well, they are among the players who I think have a shot. But in my opinion, Keon Coleman, 4.53 at the combine, to me is fast enough when you consider how well he goes up at the point of attack, or excuse me, goes up at the ball at its highest point, uses his size, uses his physicality. I struggled a little bit with the Kansas City Chiefs, number 32 overall. Obviously, the news now right now with Ray Rice, Kansas City's dynamic young wide receiver getting himself in some trouble. That might make Kansas City consider a wide receiver at the tail portion of the first round. To me, Keon Coleman is one of the easiest projections to the NFL of anybody in this wide receiver class. And again, it's some part of the reason why I could see some of these wide receivers a little bit earlier in him dropping slightly further down the board than perhaps in the top 10 as their highlight reel suggests that they should go.
Yeah, I'm not going to be surprised if we look back at Keon Coleman and think like, oh, we might have been overthinking this one a little bit. And I'm with you. I could see that so clearly. It always happens. Thursday night ends, Friday rolls around, and you say, "Holy cow! There's like a dozen really badass football players sitting there." And I'm not going to be surprised if like 4 receivers are drafted in the first 10, 12 picks on Friday night.
Yep.
Okay.
No, exactly. Me too. Me too.
I want to ask you about a couple defensive tackles here. You've got
Sure.
Byron Murphy going 21 overall to the Miami Dolphins. I think that one, it seems like one that's picked up a lot of steam. Is that as simple as just saying, well, you let Christian Wilkins walk to Las Vegas, you need a new Christian Wilkins?
Yeah, it is, and it's an acknowledgement of just how explosive the Miami Dolphins offense is. That of course, if you're going to try and compete with them, then you're going to have to throw the football to yourself a little bit. And Byron Murphy, to me, just feels like one of the 3 defensive tackles in this class, along with Jazon Newton from Illinois and Rook Orororo from Clemson, who I really believe can walk into the NFL, start immediately, and yet still have the upside that you're looking for for with a first round selection. So with Byron Murphy in particular, I mean, this is a guy who only became a starter this past season, but he is just as quick as it gets at the defensive tackle position. 6'1", 297 pounds, chops his hands very well. Again, has great initial burst, and power. And so again, he's not Christian Wilkins in my opinion. Wilkins was a 4-year starter at Clemson, but at the same time, I really think that Byron Murphy is a player who is very much on the upswing, and I think would make a lot of sense for a Miami Dolphins team. Is, as you mentioned, just lost Christian Wilkins, to the Vegas Raiders, in free agency.
You took the next one right out of my mouth because look, I mean, I pride myself on being a draft nerd. I try to stay in the trenches of this stuff all throughout the spring. But your number 23 pick, if the Vikings hold on to it, if they don't trade it away, you have them taking Ruka Rororo out of Clemson. And I don't have a problem being honest. I have not heard of this guy as a potential first round pick until I read your mock. So can you take me through this?
Yeah, I mean, this is a 3-year starter who at Clemson, which we all know how Clemson, recruits and does a terrific job of sending players. We just had just out the conversation with another former Clemson Tiger, of course, and Christian Wilkins, and I would argue that Dexter Lawrence, New York Giants, is arguably the most underrated defensive tackle in all of the NFL, certainly among the most powerful. And it's a combination of Dexter Lawrence and his power, and Christian Wilkins and his pursuit ability as a pass rusher from the interior that I really think Arororo is becoming. This is a Nigerian born player who didn't start playing football until his junior year of high school. Is actually played in high school in Michigan. And so he was being recruited by everybody in the Big Ten. And then in his senior year, just his second year of playing organized football, everybody in the country, including obviously Dabo Swinney and the Clemson Tigers, jumped on board the recruiting train. And I just see Aurora Rowe as a player who, like I mentioned with Byron Murphy, is a player who is just going to get better. And to me, one of the things that I look for when I'm evaluating players, especially in the interior, the offense and defensive line, is just raw power. I mean, I think sometimes we overthink things. And Aurora Rowe has 34-inch arms and put up the bar 29 times at the combine. No injury issues, 8 tackles for loss each of the past 3 seasons, has 9 passes broken up. So he's using those long arms for good, as opposed to, say, a Byron Murphy, who doesn't have a single pass breakup over his college career. So to me, Aurora has some immediate impact ability, can project as a starter, but I also think that they're just basically the tip of the iceberg in terms of his talent.
Again, this doesn't seem like a hard sell. If you can consistently get tackles for loss at a place like Clemson, where you know you've got to be great to even get on the field, I see the vision. Okay, Rook Orororo. Learn the name if you didn't know it already, or if you did, then congrats. You're a bigger draft nerd than I am. I do want to touch on what you've got. My team. We'll call them that. I'm linked to the Dallas Cowboys forever, and Jackson Powers Johnson, the center out of Oregon. He seems like the draft nerd's darling. I mean, I'm a big fan. He popped up on my radar at the Senior Bowl. There's a lot to like, but it does seem like it prompts an interesting conversation about just how much the NFL values the center position. Even Tyler Linderbaum a few years ago, who everybody said is like the cleanest, easiest center prospect ever, and he is playing like it in the league. He fell all the way to 25. You often see centers fall out of the first round entirely. Do you think the NFL likes Jackson Powers Johnson as much as those of us on the outside seem to?
I very much believe so. Again, as I mentioned, went to the University of Washington Pro Day, standing alongside of numerous general managers, coaches, scouts. Same thing at the University of Oregon Pro Day. I watched, I believe it was 3 or 4 different offensive line coaches. I know the Chicago Bears definitely were among them. That was putting Jackson Powers Johnson, the rest of the Oregon Ducks offensive linemen through drills, and you could just hear the power in Jackson Powers Johnson's hands. And when you see this young man in person, you see just how broad that he is. I think that's where you start to imagine just how successful that he can be in the NFL. And you make an excellent point. I love the fact that you mentioned Tyler Linderbaum because he was the cleanest center prospect that I had ever evaluated. And of course, came from Iowa, and we all know what an incredible job that Kirk Ferentz does with the Iowa Hawkeyes when it comes to translating high school players into future early NFL starters along the offensive line. Jackson Powers Johnson, I was skeptical. I mean, he did not start 2 years ago for an Oregon offensive line. That was a very good one. A bunch of those guys wound up going into the NFL. But he basically was a first year starter this past season, then jumps to the NFL. So I was very skeptical. All right, how good is this guy? Is he just a function of Oregon's offense? And then I start watching him on tape. And as you mentioned, the Senior Bowl, he was absolutely spectacular. And then again, the power, the quickness that he has at 6'3", 330 pounds. This is not Tyler Linderbaum at 290 pounds. This is a big man with incredible quickness, incredible power. Frankly, I struggled with JPJ falling all the way to number 25, the Dallas Cowboys. If he is in fact available, then David, your club, I think, would be dancing in the streets if they were able to land him at that spot, considering the fact that Dallas has a bunch of problems along the offensive line at this point, or at least a bunch of holes, including everybody's focusing at left tackle. I think they're just going to move the left guard over there. I really think that the center position, where right now you got Brock Hoffman, a former practice squatter, is the only center on the roster at this point. I feel very, very confident the Dallas Cowboys are going to make center a high priority. Not the first round, I think second round selection will probably be where Jerry Jones and the Cowboys decide to go to fix their center absence.
I mean, typically teams will often make signings to disguise their holes so that you don't 100% know what they're going to do. The Cowboys haven't bothered this year, so anything is possible, but it's all too easy to look at the Cowboys and say, yeah, whatever offensive lineman they feel the best about, it makes too much sense. Whether one of the good tackles is there for them, or yeah, maybe you just draft the best center. And I mean, I've always said I don't get the hate on the position like, oh, is it valuable enough? Because I know what great center play looks like because I covered Travis Frederick for several years, and it makes all the difference in the world. Again, I think that's a situation where maybe don't overthink it. I don't care about positional value if you can get a Pro Bowl caliber center in the 20s of the first round. Absolutely.
Well, and again, if you go back to the division, Dexter Lawrence, I just mentioned the New York Giants. Obviously, the Philadelphia Eagles are as loaded at the defensive tackle position as any club in all of the NFL. And, a big part of that is Jalen Carter, of course, just returning for his second season in the NFL. And then Washington, while I argued before that that's a club that is in a real roster rebuild, not along the defensive line. So if you want to keep Dak Prescott upright, and that's, of course, the best opportunity the Dallas Cowboys have to get back to a deep playoff run, perhaps even a Super Bowl run again, then I think that it is critical that whatever avenue you go down to get yourself a high quality center, then the Dallas Cowboys, I believe, are going to be doing that. And to me, there's no question about it. The number one center in this draft class is Oregon's Jackson Powers Johnson.
Okay, one more. Well, I have two more for you. Let's start with the self-serving one because we were fortunate enough here at the NFL on Fox podcast to have Missouri edge Darius Robinson drop by the show. Wonderful guy. I'm rooting for him from here on out. You've got him going 30th to the Baltimore Ravens, which just makes way too much sense. Like, oh, draft the huge, talented guy on the defensive front and just let him develop. But I am curious, as somebody who dives into this stuff, who knows all this stuff, what do you see as your vision for Darius Robinson? Because this is a guy that has worn a lot of hats.
He really has, and that's one of the reasons why I love Darius Robinson's upside and projection to the NFL, and I really like the fit with the Baltimore Ravens. I mean, we have seen the Ravens do this so many times, of course, where they just allow really good football players, really physical, long, athletic football players to fall into their lap, and that's exactly what Darius Robinson can do. We spent a couple of moments earlier talking about, say, Byron Murphy, the second defensive tackle out of Texas, going to the Miami Dolphins, about 5, 6 picks ahead of this. I think with a player like a Murphy, for example, he is at his best as a traditional three technique and a 4-3 alignment where he's basically just a penetrator. With Darius Robinson, to me, one of the things you like about him is he can play standing up as an outside linebacker, rushing off the edge, as he did at Missouri. He can be along the defensive line at basically every single position 3-4, 4-3, defensive tackle, defensive end. He can do it all. And the Baltimore Ravens, of course, now obviously they are making that transition from their former defensive coordinator Mike McDonald is now the head coach in Seattle. But at the same time, one of the things the Baltimore Ravens have prided themselves on for years is John Harbaugh's defense being versatile, being multiple. And I think that Darius Robinson would not only be a quality fit in terms of value at this point in the draft, but I think that he would make the Baltimore Ravens defense that much more dynamic.
You're right. I mean, the Ravens just sit back and let like big, talented guys fall to them in their draft slot. It's always very impressive. One last one for you. And I mean, you mentioned Kansas City's options. We'll see. We'll see what plays out with Rashee Rice. It's very early in that whole situation to speculate too much. So this one, it's not so much about a pick at the bottom of the board, but it's one of my favorite plots when you talk about the first round of the draft is who might be there that prompts a move up. You know, I think about, speaking of the Baltimore Ravens, them getting Lamar Jackson at the end of the first, or it could even be, you know, with as many great offensive tackles and receivers as there are, you know, you think, for instance, you think about the Carolina Panthers sitting there with pick 33 and pick 39. The Commanders have every pick in the world available to them, it feels like. So is there a prospect or a spot where you think we could see a team get antsy and make their move up to the bottom of the first round? Maybe, you know, we haven't brought up Bo Nix. Maybe it's a situation like that. Is there a scenario where you could see that happening this year?
Yeah, Bo Nix is the player that I absolutely think could be the apple of the eye that some eager team is going to want to invest their first round selection in him. And of course, the NFL draft fans who are listening and watching your fine podcast here are going to know that the first round prospects, they have the NFL teams have that 5th year option, and that is huge because if you do hit on a quarterback, then having them on that relatively palatable rookie contract rather than having to re-up them is huge. So I think that the Kansas City Chiefs, sitting there number 32 overall, are in a really enviable position. Because their pick at number 32 is just worth so much more than the number 33 overall pick, which, as you mentioned, the Carolina Panthers own. So to me, that's what's going to be interesting is to see if there is a club perhaps a team like the Denver Broncos, for example, they actually try to trade with a divisional rival. They're one of the clubs that I think are going to be desperate enough that if they get left behind in the mad quarterback frenzy that I expect to see happen in the first 10, 11 selections this year, then they may basically have to push all their cards in the table, so to speak, to be able to try and trade up to get themselves a young quarterback. They don't have the draft ammunition to move up into the top 10. So perhaps they decided their best bet would be to move to number 32 overall.
I'm stealing this from somebody on Twitter. I apologize, but it is a funny thought. Is I think watching Sean Payton battle against his own patience is going to be a very funny subplot for this draft, whether it happens way up at number 12 or later on in the draft. But I don't know that I trust Sean Payton to sit back and wait for things to come to him when you're talking about who's going to be playing quarterback for the Broncos for the long term. So I definitely think that's worth mentioning. Rob, this was so much fun, man. I mean, for me, it's less about the picks and who's making them. Like I said, it's just the thought exercise of, oh yeah, that makes sense. Or yes, I can absolutely see a world where that happens. I love going through this stuff. I appreciate the time, man. We'll be sure to we'll have you on here as we inch closer and closer to the draft.
Looking forward to it always, David. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks one more time to Rob Rang for stopping by. Like we said, his mock, if you want to go see the whole thing, read his rationale for all of it. His mock is on foxsports.com on the Fox Sports app. It dropped Monday, so you can go find it there. Let him know what you think about the rest of the mock, all of those decisions. Like I said, this is just the beginning. We got a busy week. We are going to be back so soon. Plenty of cool content coming your way this week. So you're going to want to make sure, if you're not, subscribe to the show, Spotify, Apple Podcast, the YouTube channel at NFL on Fox. Wherever you do it, you're not going to want to miss it because we will be dropping new content regularly this week. I will be back in your ear so soon. As always, I appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all next time.